Meet Brenda Powell. Brenda was born on the 19th of March 1969 in Salem, Ohio, and from an early age she displayed an innate gift for caring for others. Her passion for nurturing set her on a path to become a beacon of hope and comfort. As she progressed through her education, she geared her studies towards her passion for caretaking. After Brenda graduated from the University of Akron, she worked at the Akron's Children's Hospital, where her exceptional skills and serene demeanor quickly earned her the admiration of both children and colleagues. For 28 years, she was a pillar in the Center for Childhood Cancer and Blood Disorders, where she not only excelled in her role, but also pioneered the oncology teen program, creating joyous moments for families navigating the harrowing journey of cancer recovery. Brenda's reputation as a second mother to countless children and a cherished friend to her co-workers was legendary. At home, she was equally dedicated. Happily married to Steve and devoted mother of two, her life was a testament to her unwavering commitment to family, friends, and her life's work. The tragic and shocking murder of 50-year-old Brenda Powell by her own daughter in March of 2020 sent ripples of grief and disbelief throughout their small Ohio community. 19-year-old Sydney Powell had just started her second year at Mount Union University when she took her mother's life in their family home. To neighbors, the Powell family seemed happy and normal. Parents Steve and Brenda doted on Sydney and her younger brother Andrew. By all accounts, Sydney and Brenda shared an incredibly close bond, which makes the brutal crime all the more difficult to comprehend. Just 2 years earlier, Sydney was finishing an impressive high school career. She excelled both academically and athletically. Sydney made the honor roll all 4 years and served as captain of the soccer team her senior season. Her natural smarts and dedication earned her a scholarship to nearby Mount Union. When Sydney moved into her college dorm in 2018, she appeared excited and ready to thrive. The future seemed bright. Yet in one fateful afternoon, the Powell family's trajectory veered into tragedy and darkness. While Brenda was on the phone with college officials regarding Sydney's poor academic performance, the unthinkable happened. Her beloved daughter viciously attacked her. The brutal assault occurred just minutes after Brenda arrived home, expecting a calm discussion with Sydney. But triggered by mounting lies and anxiety over her grades, Sydney exploded with shocking violence. Using weapons from the family kitchen, she beat and stabbed her mother to death. In the aftermath, Sydney would claim temporary insanity and delusions, but prosecutors argued that Sydney remained conscious of her actions. The horrific crime left the Powell family, friends, and larger community reeling. They were forced to grapple with the senseless loss of Brenda Powell, as well as ponder whether Sydney was truly detached from reality when she carried out her deadly attack.
It is a crime that rocked an Akron neighborhood yesterday, and now there are new shocking details. Today, police said a young woman is responsible for a brutal attack that left her mother dead. As News 5's Bob Jones reports, detectives are still trying to figure out why this happened.
When Sydney Powell arrived on Mount Union's campus in August 2018, she embarked on her college experience with enthusiasm. Her initial freshman year unfolded as a rather typical one. Sydney lived in a dorm suite with her best friend from high school, Lauren Curry. The two childhood buddies had dreamed of one day becoming college roommates. Now with Lauren by her side, Sydney quickly acclimated to campus life. She and Lauren joined a sorority, allowing Sydney another instant circle of friends and a round of parties and activities. Extremely sociable by nature, Sydney flourished with this robust college social calendar. Academically, Sydney also appeared perfectly capable of managing the new academic rigor. Though known to be occasionally anxious about schoolwork, she earned solid grades her first semester. When she arrived back home in Akron for winter break that December, her family found her happy and full of amusing new stories about dorm mishaps and late-night campus happenings. The adjustment to college posed Sydney with few problems initially. In many ways, Sydney's immersion in the college experience during that first year was precisely what Steve and Brenda Powell hoped for when sending their daughter off to Mount Union. The small private school offered a nurturing environment not too far from home. After watching Sydney spread her wings socially, the Powell parents felt reassured she had the right balance of independence and support. Her larger circle of college friends brought Sydney out of her shell a bit too. Since forging such an unusually close relationship with her mother, especially, Sydney had always been a bit shy around others until she got to know them. But at Mount Union, she grew more confident. For Steve and Brenda, Sydney's initial transition exceeded their highest expectations. She came home for brief visits with her head full of exciting plans for the next semester or sorority event. Proud of the bright, engaged, graceful young woman Sydney was becoming, the Powell parents looked forward to 3 more years of watching her thrive in college. But unbeknownst to her family, Sydney's initially smooth college experience hit its first major snag early in her second year at Mount Union. As she began fall classes in late August 2019, trouble was quietly brewing. Sydney struggled to keep up with coursework demands. Perhaps more interested in campus social activities, Sydney failed to attend classes or complete assignments reliably. She earned poor marks that first semester of her sophomore year. Then right before winter break, Sydney received devastating news. Due to her failing grades, she was placed on academic probation. This meant if her grades did not improve the following semester, she would face suspension. Still, instead of informing her parents of her probation status and that her scholarship was in jeopardy, Sydney told no one. In January 2020, she returned to Mount Union and moved back into her dorm as if nothing had happened. Unfortunately, Sydney's grades did not improve that spring semester. By continuing to fail classes, Sydney was soon formally suspended from Mount Union. She was forbidden from living on campus or attending classes. Yet, she carried on with a facade, pretending to still be a university student. She moved out of her dorm and started staying in hotels in the area, paying for a stay with the money her dad thought was for her tuition. As far as friends could tell, Sydney seemed excited about the new semester, and by all accounts, she was a regular college student. Sydney managed to hide her secret through the month of January, but her house of cards would soon come crumbling down. While still living the facade and trying to sit in on classes and sorority events, in February, Mount Union administrators confronted her. They reiterated that as a suspended student, Sydney was prohibited from campus grounds and facilities. Sydney told officials that her parents were struggling and she wished to avoid worrying them, so she asked them for an extension to allow her time to vacate the campus. The administration initially agreed and set strict timelines for Sydney to vacate, yet she failed to comply with multiple warnings. On February the 24th, almost 2 months into the spring 2020 term, security had to intervene and forbid Sydney from remaining on campus. Finally forced to reckon with losing her scholarship and status as a student, Sydney had nowhere to hide anymore. Her elaborate ruse to keep up perfect appearances could not withstand the school's decisive actions. After years of relentless high achievement, Sydney suddenly found herself at risk of being a failure, both in her own mind and that of her proud, loving family. The pressures weighed inside, setting the stage for an emotional eruption.
And just briefly, I'm going to go ahead and put this on the document camera. These are specifically, I'm going to draw your attention to the top left. These are specifically the transcripts for Miss Sydney Powell.
Yes.
Okay. And those are the classes she was enrolled in specifically in those semesters?
Correct.
Okay. And the transcripts ends at the end of the fall of 2019. She wasn't enrolled for the spring?
Correct.
Now, Ms. Gaffney, back to after that conversation with Ms. Powell, she said she just needed a few days. What happened next?
The following, so after that date elapsed, we became aware that that Sydney was still spending quite a bit of time in the hall, more than enough that it seemed as though she was still living there. According to the hall staff who had checked to see if she had moved. And we found that she had not, in fact, moved out and
In
was
the
still
dorm?
of the residence hall and was still coming and going that following week.
Okay, so what did you guys do next?
We again asked Sydney to come over to the office. I think we had a staff member find her over in the residence hall and bring her over to the office. And
Okay, was she able to meet with you?
she was, yeah.
Okay, and what happened at that second meeting?
So when she came over for that meeting, she met with myself and Dean Frazier, our Vice President of Student Affairs.
Is that John Frazier?
John Frazier,
Okay.
right. We met with her together to indicate that we needed to talk about the fact that she was still living on campus despite not being enrolled, and that we couldn't continue to have her living on campus.
Do you know when this might have been during the spring semester?
It was in February.
In February, okay. And what happened? What was Sydney's reaction to that second conversation?
She understood. She was just taking her longer to move out. She needed a little bit more time. We asked if she had shared with her parents the fact that she wasn't enrolled. She said that she had, and because we again offered, would it help if we would to have a conversation? Would you want to call your parents and see if they could come down and help you move out?
And Ms. Powell told you that she already told them?
And then, yes.
Okay.
And that they were having that they were on vacation. In fact, they weren't home. And that they were having a lot of problems with her little brother. And she didn't want to bother them because of all the issues they were having with her little brother.
Okay.
And just when the extent of Sydney's issues began to surface, the long-kept secret erupted in irreversible tragedy. On the morning of March the 3rd, 2020, matters came to a head. Sydney's father, Steve, while attempting to log into his daughter's university account, found himself mysteriously locked out. Steve checked Sydney's location through their family app. He noticed it showed that Sydney was at their Akron home when she should have been on campus. Sensing something was amiss, he called Mount Union and spoke with school administrators, learning the devastating news that Sydney was no longer enrolled. Alarmed by the startling turn of events, Steve left work at 11:30 a.m. and rushed home to confront his daughter. He left his phone at work to prevent tracking of his movements on the app. When Steve arrived, he found Sydney there, and she had no choice but to confess the full story to her father. She admitted to failing classes and being told to leave campus weeks earlier. Caught off guard by the revelations, Steve suggested calling Brenda, the family member most adept at navigating emotional dialogues. Yet, as worried parents focused on supporting their daughter, no one could anticipate how rapidly this family crisis would spiral into abject terror. While Steve was on his way back to work, Brenda was making her way home to speak with her daughter. She arrived home shortly before noon and called the university for clarity on Sydney's standing and the retracing of events. University Dean John Fraser, with Associate Dean Michelle Gaffney by his side, initiated the difficult conversation at 12:36 p.m. Unbeknownst to them, Sydney planned to stop her mother from finding out the truth even at this late stage. While still talking to Brenda, they suddenly heard a blood-curdling scream, followed by several loud thuds and sounds of a struggle. Startled, Dean Fraser repeatedly shouted Brenda's name.
Frazier was sitting at his desk and I was sitting next to it. He dialed. The phone was answered, and Mrs. Powell answered.
When you say Mrs. Powell, is that Brenda who answered?
Brenda answered, yes.
Okay. And what did you tell Brenda at that time?
So Dean Frazier was speaking and simply said, Brenda, this is Dean Frazier. I'm sitting here with Michelle Gaffney, our Associate Dean of Students. We're returning your call, and that's about as far as we got.
Did Brenda respond to that introduction at all?
Yeah.
Okay,
yes.
what did she say?
I think he asked, "Is this Brenda Powell?"
Oh, okay.
And she said yes, and then he identified himself.
Okay. And Miss Gaffney, what happened next?
There was a very large or a very loud sort of thud sound, like a pounding or a thud, accompanied by by a pretty loud scream. And the scream might have actually been first, and then the thud,
Okay.
as I think about it. And then there was sort of an expulsion. The other sound that I heard at that same time, or right after, was sort of an expulsion of air, like the air was knocked out of somebody.
Okay.
I'd always heard that expression of the air being knocked, having the wind knocked out of you, but I didn't. That's actually what it sounded like. And then several more repeated thuds. I don't know how to describe the sound.
No, and that's okay. And you and Mr. Frazier could hear this from the other end of the phone.
From the other, it was on speakerphone, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
Did you hear any communication during these thuds?
Just the screaming, and so we were both talking into the phone, saying, what's happening? Are you okay? Do you need help? What's going on?
Yeah, can you describe your mindset at this time?
I mean, I very definitely felt like someone was being attacked. And so we weren't getting an answer. I think at some point I said, if you can't respond, we're going to call the police. If we don't hear if no one can tell us what's going on. The dean's has an administrative assistant right outside his door. So I said, well, I'm going to get Sydney's address. And he kept talking. And so,
Mr. Frazier?
Mr. Frazier, yeah, Dean Frazier. So I opened the door and told our admin, I said, I need Sydney Powell's address right away. And in the meantime, I had my phone and I was looking up the number for the Akron Police Department.
No, yeah, why didn't, let me ask you this. I'm sorry, I interrupt you again.
Okay.
Why didn't you want to call 911?
Because I knew it would go to Stark County Dispatch. I work with our security and the Alliance Police quite a bit.
Okay.
And we actually, when we need the police, we call the Alliance Police Dispatch and not 911 because it goes to Stark County and not Alliance.
Okay.
And they often don't. It takes longer.
So you wanted to get directly in contact
I knew she was from Akron. I wanted to get directly to the Akron Police. So.
And Ms. Gaffney, can you describe how that phone call continued or what happened next?
So while Tara is our assistant, while Tara was looking up that address, the phone cut off at some point after. I would say that somewhere in the neighborhood of 6 or 7 of those thuddings, those sort of thud sounds. And the screaming had continued.
And when you say the phone cut off, did the call drop or
the
was
call
it
dropped?
Okay.
We lost the call.
Okay.
And so we decided to keep, while we were waiting for the address, to keep calling. We called the number back.
Brenda's number
that she had left, and we called twice, and there was no answer. It rang and rang and rang and no answer. When it went to voicemail, we hung up and we called again. And then on the third time, and I had just gotten the address as the phone was answered.
Okay.
On the third try to the number, and Dean Frazier said something along the lines of, "Brenda, is that you? Are you there?" And the voice on the other end said, "Yes, this is Brenda." Yes, this is Brenda.
Now, Ms. Gaffney, did you recognize that voice on the line?
Yeah.
Okay, was that Brenda Powell?
It was not Brenda.
Who did you recognize that voice to be?
I was sure it was Sydney. Both Dean Frazier and I looked at each other and sort of shook our heads at each other and said, that's not Brenda. And he then said, I don't, Sydney, I think this is you. This is not Brenda.
And what happened next?
The phone went dead.
Okay.
Associate Dean Michelle Gaffney immediately notified authorities, and police soon arrived at the Powell household. Upon entry, responders were stunned to find Sydney covered in blood and in a detached state. She was unresponsive to initial questions, alternating between hysterical wailing and eerie catatonic states. While officers attempted to manage her behavior, others investigated further. In the master bedroom, they discovered Brenda Powell's lifeless body. She had suffered over 20 stab wounds and blunt force trauma to her head. Nearby, a cast iron skillet and a large kitchen knife, both stained with blood, were found. When Sydney was eventually calmed and somewhat conscious, She gave an account suggesting an intruder had committed the attack. According to Sydney, an unknown man had broken into the house through a window or back door, attacked her mother, and left after Brenda told Sydney to run and hide. Sydney claimed she hid elsewhere in the house, only emerging when the noise had stopped, finding her mother fatally wounded. Several pieces of evidence contradicted Sydney's story and pointed to her as the perpetrator. The back window, supposedly broken by the intruder, had blood smears on the outside, indicating it was broken from the inside. Sydney also had visible wounds consistent with stabbing. Her claim that Brenda told her to flee seemed unlikely given the nature of the attack. The brutality of Brenda's injuries suggested a personal motive rather than a random attack. Investigators concluded Sydney staged the crime scene to cover her own involvement. In April 2020, Sydney Powell was arrested and formally charged with her mother's murder. Shortly after, her grandmother posted $25,000 bail, allowing for Sydney's temporary release. Sydney moved in with her grandmother while awaiting further legal proceedings. During her trial in September 2023, her defense team argued a not guilty plea by reason of insanity, citing a severe psychotic breakdown. They claimed Sydney had schizophrenia, which led to her detachment from reality. The prosecution maintained Sydney was aware of her actions and attempted to conceal her guilt. They argued that her attempts to stage the scene indicated she was not insane. A psychologist for the state contested the schizophrenia claim, stating Sydney instead had anxiety and personality disorders. After 2 weeks of testimony, the jury sided with the prosecution on September 20th, 2023, finding Sydney guilty of all charges, including murder, assault, and tampering with evidence.
The jury has found an Akron woman guilty of stabbing her mother to death more than 3 years ago. Investigators say Sydney Powell and her mother Brenda got into an argument in March of 2020. It turned deadly when Sydney stabbed her mother several times. Sydney was 19 at the time of the crime. She pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity. The jury found her guilty on all charges, including murder. She'll be sentenced next month.
Verdict form number 1 as to count 1 reads, "We, the jury in this case, being duly impaneled, sworn, and affirmed, do hereby find the defendant Sydney Powell guilty of the offense of murder as charged in count 1. Verdict form number 2 reads, "We, the jury in this case, being duly impaneled, sworn, and affirmed, do hereby find the defendant Sydney Powell guilty of the offense of murder as charged in count 2. Verdict form number 3 reads, "We, the jury in this case, being duly impaneled, sworn, and affirmed, do hereby find the defendant Sydney Powell guilty of the offense of felonious assault as charged in count 3. And finally, verdict form number 4 reads, "We, the jury in this case, being duly impaneled, sworn, and affirmed, do hereby find the defendant Sydney Powell guilty of the offense of tampering with evidence as charged in count 4. On count 1, ma'am, I sentence you to an indefinite sentence of 15 years to life in the Ohio Department of Corrections. On count 4 of the indictment, I sentence you to 3 years in the Ohio Department of Corrections. Those 2 sentences to be run concurrent with and not consecutive to each other."
The verdict offered little comfort to those devastated by Brenda Powell's death. Sydney's once happy family was permanently altered by her actions, leaving a profound impact on everyone connected to them. Thank you for watching. Until next time, stay safe and take care.